There are 4,218 PS2 games, and I'm beating every one of them. I've got to own the game because I'm playing everything on the original hardware, but I've beefed it up with a RetroTink 5X, some component cables, and more to come soon. Can I do this before I die of old age? I hope so. Shadow Hearts was developed by Sacknoth and released in 2001. The game takes place just before World War I and uses real-world events and locations, although some things are inaccurate, mostly due to it being an alternate timeline. Sadly, the game released right before Final Fantasy X and was buried under the massive weight it brought. Can I beat this bizarre horror RPG? Shadow Hearts was a surprisingly good RPG, I just didn't expect it. It is a horror game, however, I didn't find it to be very scary or even really that much into horror, especially since a lot of the game is a little quirky. But you'll see that as we go over the journey. So let's start at the beginning. The opening cutscene shows a young blonde woman on a train going through Japan, and as things start to progress, some dude comes onto the train and starts killing people. Pretty gruesomely, I might add. His name, Roger Bacon. It's clear his goal is to grab the girl. However, our main character finally shows up and gets his arm cut off and then reattaches it. It never happens like that again. I'm kind of confused as to why it happens now, but well, we're pretty strong apparently because getting our arm cut off does not stop us. However, after we get blown back through the train by that dude who's taking the girl, we start our first fight. Only about a minute in and I already have a lot to explain, so let's begin with the biggest thing that makes a difference in this RPG. First of all, the fighting is very similar to most other RPGs. You have attack, you have item, you have abilities, and that's pretty much it, right? No, everything in combat is decided by the Judgment Ring. It appears on the screen at kind of this interesting angle, and depending on what you've selected to do, the ring will have different colored areas, some the same color, some two colors, and you'll have spots in between. There's a hand that goes around the Judgment Ring. You'll want to press X as the hand passes over these colored areas, and like I said, depending on what you do, you may have a single colored area or two colored areas, such as a red and an orange. The red is always your critical spot, if that ability has a critical feature to it, such as normal attacks. Separate from your attacks, some abilities have two different colored areas as well, however they don't count as critical areas. The two areas count as activating the ability and then damaging. Other skills will have simply one area you need to hit for it to actually deal damage. And some attacks, such as your normal attacks, will have separate areas you must hit in a row for them to activate all of the attacks in the sequence. So your normal attacks will have 3 hits, and if you miss one of those, depending on where you miss it, you'll miss attacks. So you've got to hit them in order and accurately. I was pretty surprised when trying to use an item also brings up the Judgment Ring. Like I said, everything you do in combat has a Judgment Ring attached to it. You've got to hit those marks, otherwise you're not going to be able to use the ability. This feature alone makes combat so much more fun because it gives you a lot of power. If you miss, it's your fault. If you hit a normal attack, great. You can hit critical for every single normal attack. Maybe you do extra damage just because you were good enough at the Judgment Ring to get the extra damage. So the game really allows you to learn how to do extra damage, how to do just enough damage, or how to do 0 damage if you're not good enough. Now, combat is not the only place you'll find the Judgment Ring appearing. During different segments of the game, you'll see it, including the shop and just doing some kind of random thing, maybe in a dungeon. I'll talk about those when we get there, but most of them, except for the shop, are the same. You'll always get to do them until you finish them, even if you screw up once, twice, 3 times, so you'll get to redo them. I'm not too worried about those, they're easy. The shop, however, has a different one, and when we get there, I'll explain what it is. Okay, enough about the Judgment Ring for now. Let's look at the bottom 3 things on the screen when you're fighting. You have your HP, which is obvious, your MP, which is also obvious, but you also have an SP meter. These are your sanity points, and they go down for every action in combat. Sometimes 1, sometimes 2, depending on what you do, what ability you use, and if you have an item equipped that subtracts more than 1 per turn. Enemies can also affect this meter simply by using an ability to reduce your SP. When it hits 0, your character technically loses their sanity and begins fighting wildly. This is called Berserk. You can't control them at all, and they'll attack anyone and everything. Sometimes they'll also use items. One of my characters at one point healed the enemy, which is wonderful. So you don't ever want your sanity to drop too low. You can either finish fights quickly or use an item to recover it, just like your HP and MP, but you have to pay attention to it. Now, the only character in the game that uses SP as a resource is the main character, who is a harmonixer. He can change into demons by using his sanity points to do so. However, this is a great cost. Obviously, it will cause him to go berserk if you're not paying attention, so you need to pay attention. Otherwise, you'll just have him change into a demon, go berserk, and you'll lose the fight. This train sequence is really short, and we end up on top of the train where we fight Roger Bacon. We obviously lose to him. He's super powerful, and he hits us with a big old 999. And then just as he's about to kill us, Alice is her name, the woman, floats up shining in the air, and it distracts Roger just long enough for us to go up and sucker punch him right in the face. It's a pretty hard punch because there's a lot of blood and missing like flesh, but we grab the girl, jump off the train, and it sails on with him on top of it. He's really powerful though, so I don't know why he couldn't just jump off and follow us, but he just decides not to. We land, and eventually we're able to get out that this woman's name is Alice, like I said before, and we can name our own character, and I name him Rusty Shackleford because there's enough letters to let do so. So when I refer to the main character, I'll be calling him Rusty Shackleford. So please, just go with that. We also learn a couple other things. The first thing we learn is we don't know what the crap's going on with this woman, but we do learn that our main character has voices in his head, and they're telling him to protect this woman because we don't know why, but he listens to them because why wouldn't you listen to the voices in your head? We also learn that Rusty is a pervert, at least at this part of the game. Everyone reassured me many times that he changes as the game goes on, but at first he seems really bad, and it's not like it's endearing in any way, but he tries to constantly touch her when she's passed out or sleeping, which is great. Once Alice and Rusty get moving, she's added to the party, where she is the party healer. She has very low SP points and very low attack, but her abilities are very strong, and mostly support abilities like healing and status removal, as well as a party-wide heal much later in the game. We fight a lot of different small enemies, bats and wolves, until we eventually get to these sluice gates, where we've got to find a small handle, put it on one of the gates, and do a judgment ring ability. And this is one of the very few times I'll talk about this. Here is out in the world a judgment ring. It's very simple. If you miss the marks the first time, just do it again. You don't have to worry about it. You don't lose anything when you miss it. After we progress a little further, we find ourselves too tired to go on, so we make a fire and Alice rests while we talk about touching her while she's sleeping, which is terrible. But all of a sudden, someone comes up to the camp with a mask on, and it's our dad. But he's not real. He's dead, and he's a vision. He taunts us about the monsters we killed coming back to get us, and then he fights us and kills us. He actually transforms just like we do into a monster and then destroys us. We then wake up in our dreams in a cemetery, and apparently we visited this cemetery before, or at least Rusty has. It's in his dreams all the time. He says that every time he goes here, he wakes up just before a monster's about to eat him, but this time he's not waking up, and no one's about to eat him yet. There's a bunch of gravestones littered all over the place, and they have different elements associated with them. It's all the elements that are in the game: fire, earth, water, air, light, darkness, and each of these gravestones signifies one of those different elements. When they are glowing, you can then approach the gravestone and fight a monster that you can then transform into if you kill it. You'll be using this quite often during the game. You'll be able to come here whenever you want by going to a save point and just going to the graveyard. This first fight is against the earth element, and it's very easy. Now, to fight these monsters specifically, as you travel around when you defeat regular monsters out in the open world, you'll get points specific to those elements, and when those element points reach a certain threshold, it will then say, hey, you're able to go fight a monster there. And as you raise the threshold for each element, you'll get stronger and stronger versions, until eventually you hit the top version, and as long as you have enough points, you can go fight the ultimate version of that element's monster. Okay, now that that's over with, we travel over to a large door, and there's 4 floating masks, and they talk to us about how there's really nothing that we can do to stop whatever's coming, but we can delay it by fighting them and purging malice. As you fight things in the game, you slowly accrue malice into this container on the pause menu, and as it goes up, the game will tell you that it's gone up, and the closer it gets to the color red, the closer you get to fighting the Reaper, which sounds very much like Persona 3, exactly like Persona 3, and the fact that you're in Tartarus too long and the Reaper will come try and get you. Now, I never fought the Reaper in this game. I was always fine and always purged my malice in time, so I didn't fight him, so I don't even know what the fight's like. But it's really simple. I thought it might be more of a problem later on, but no, you have a chance to go purge this thing pretty much whenever you want, and as long as you are not using Rusty in any fights, malice does not accrue. It has to specifically have Rusty in the fight. So if Rusty's not fighting, it doesn't matter. And again, you can come back here whenever you want to try and purge the malice. The closer it is to red, the harder the fight is to purge it. Otherwise, it's pretty simple. After that nightmare, we travel across some cliff faces for a little while fighting enemies until we reach a small village that is very peculiar. And it's so peculiar, in fact, that they do not even hide the fact that they're trying to eat us. Well, mostly Alice. us. They keep saying how men are just sticks and bones and not any good to them at all, but women are full of fat and gravy is what it said. Literally what they say in the village, and they constantly talk about wanting to eat us. I mean, it's so obvious. I don't know what anyone's trying to hide here. I don't know. Anyway, so we go through the village a little bit until eventually they try and lure us to go to sleep. Well, we don't, and we're ready to fight, and so when these two little kids come up, we kick their butts because they're like Hellcats or something. The old woman of the village is the leader, and she's kind of the reason that the village is the way it is, so our ultimate goal is to kick her ass. And as we try to leave the village to go figure out what's going on, maybe to get some help, we find this quack oracle and another guy with him, and they're at the gate and it won't open. The oracle's name is Zhu Zhen, and he becomes a very fast party member throughout the rest of our journey. And the man he's traveling with is an acupuncturist, who we will see throughout the whole rest of our journey as well. He's not a party member, but in every town we go to, he'll be there ready to help you get your weapons stronger and make it easier to hit the areas in your judgment ring. You can upgrade your weapons by going to him and spending some money, and he'll do one of the two things: attack power or widening the area of your judgment rings. And you just spend money on each of the characters. Every weapon is individual, so you'll have to do it for each weapon every time you buy a new weapon. Zhu Zhen turns out not to be a quack oracle though, even though that was his name originally. He turns out to know exactly what he's here to do. See, someone's hired him to come take care of this village, which is obviously having some issues with people eating other people. Turns out that there used to be this little idol, a black tortoise, that was protecting the village. It is now gone, and now that it's gone, it can be attacked, and it was. In fact, all these people are now monsters and are trying to eat people. You're allowed to come into the village no matter what time of day it is, but you're not allowed to leave. So now that they're in here, they have to gather a couple tools that they can use to lure the old woman, who turns out to be a demon, into the village where they can fight her out in the open. She's trying to hide herself so she can't be found. She's protecting this village and the spot where the black tortoise used to be for some reason. We don't know why, but we get her to come out and we beat her ass. Man, Zhu Zhen's really good. He has our first area of effect where it hits everyone in the battle spell, and it's very helpful for leveling up and getting points towards elemental monsters that Rusty can transform in. After we beat the first boss in the game, we talk about the possibility of this black tortoise and what's going on, and the fact that we're probably never going to see each other again. And Zhu Zhen leaves the party, which sucks because he's an awesome party member. And we're back down to 2. I really like having a full party in the games. Before we move on, we see a scene with Lieutenant Kawashima, a woman part of the Japanese army who's investigating the train where all those people died because of Kevin Bacon, or Roger Bacon, whatever his name is. And he came to take Alice. Obviously, we saved her and moved on. They don't know where any of us are, but she is suspicious. After this, we see another scene with Roger Bacon speaking to a man named Dewey, although I'm not sure if his name is actually Dewey. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, they begin speaking about the fact that Alice has gotten away from Roger, and Dewey is looking for her as well. Apparently, she is some kind of key to doing this Demon's Gate invocation, and we don't know the extent of what this invocation does, but it obviously isn't good. They continue to speak in flowery, vague words to each other until eventually Roger leaves. These guys seem like they're friends, but they're not really. In fact, after Roger leaves, Dewey tells all of his men, his minions, to watch out for Roger and don't get tricked by him. They need the girl. We finally return to Rusty and Alice is sleeping on the bench of the next town over, a much more populated and nice town to be in, not trying to eat us. And eventually we walk around until we find a man called the lottery member number 15. This is a mechanic in the game that's really fun and I enjoy a lot. You'll eventually find some lottery tickets around, scattered around in hidden areas, and you can talk to a lottery member, and each lottery member has a different pool of items you can win. A judgment ring comes up and you can then press the X button to stop the little hand from moving and hope you land on the color of the item you want. Pressing X doesn't stop the hand, it just slows it down until it eventually comes to a rest. This makes it very difficult when you come to an area that is very small with an item you very much want. And this is how you can tell what items are rare and what are not. If the area is large and you're gonna hit it no matter what, then it's probably not very rare, like the tissues under white, which are most of what you get every time you mess up. Regardless, you can visit each of the lottery members and try and get all their rarest items, and they will give you an advantage if you're able to get them. This is where save scumming would really help. Use a couple lottery tickets, go reload the game if you don't get what you want, keep trying again. Alice and Rusty move through the city, which is being protected by the Japanese army because of all the weird stuff going on. So we are forced into a shop. And before we go into the shop, we see a woman on top of the roof, and her name is Malkovich. Being John Malkovich? Anyway, she's set up some bombs because she is a spy, and she's trying to stop the Japanese army from moving around too much. She's actually trying to stop Lieutenant Kawashima, the woman we saw investigating the train. Apparently they don't like each other, so this woman's trying to stop her. But that's all we get with Malkovich. We go into the shop and we get our first guild card. Guild cards allow you to get a discount when you're at shops, but the caveat is that you must do a judgment ring minigame to get the discount. And if if you miss, you don't get the discount, you've got to pay full price. Each guild card gives you about 10% off of the total price and 5% towards your sell price for each one that you have. Now you have to perform a judgment ring for each individual guild card. So that means if you have two, you perform the first one for the first 10% and the second one for the second 10%. That's how it works. Every time you want to buy something, you want the discount, you got to do it twice, and you got to make sure you hit or you don't get the discount, and you have to pay full price. The second you do it and you miss, you just got to pay. While we're here, let me just quickly say that armor and accessories perform a lot of helpful things in combat, not just defenses. They do provide you from defenses from status ailments and also just extra things you can do in combat, which is very helpful. And you need to make sure you've got a few of each accessory that will help with things like stopping paralysis, stopping confusion, stopping things from happening to your judgment ring, which enemies can make all of your judgment ring abilities different. Let's say they decide to speed it up by 2 times. Maybe they make the judgment ring tiny on the screen so you can barely see it. There's lots of cool things that can happen, and you'll want to protect against them. Immediately after exiting the shop, we pretty much get called out on the radio as the suspects in the train killings, and we weren't the ones who did it, but now we have to run. And the second we run out of the shop, Malkovich's bombs go off that she was setting up, and so we get caught up in this blast, and we have to go underground and fight some monsters. A little bit into this underground area, Margaret, or Malkovich, comes down and joins our party. She has guns, which is kind of interesting because takes place in World War I, and she's got some cool weaponry. But the thing is that everyone's abilities are a little bit different. They come from a different source. My character is a harmonixer, he changes into demons. Alice uses her innate abilities to cast healing and holy magic. But Margaret decides to just call in on a walkie-talkie for a chopper to bring her weapons in, which is so freaking cool. I love that detail. And everyone, even Zhu Zhen, he has his magic coming from a different spot, a different source. So it's cool to see what everyone does. Before we leave the sewers, I finally get enough experience in the water levels to fight a water monster in the graveyard, and then I can transform into it. By the way, you can summon 3 different monsters on your character at one time. You've just got to go equip them in the menu, and you can transform into any of them in the battle that you want. To leave the sewers, there's a sealed door that we must activate and fight a small mini-boss to get through, and we do. He's very simple, and he's practically just a slightly stronger version of the monsters we've been fighting in the sewers anyway. We exit into this airfield where we're able to take an airplane and leave, but before we do, there's this dog that's been kind of following us around every so often. He hasn't really been a big deal. They just kind of say, oh, there's a little dog, and then he runs away. We'll eventually find out that he's actually Dwight in disguise. He's using this dog to spy on us, but we kick its ass. It's a really easy boss fight, and it's just kind of, our main character doesn't even care. Honestly, he's like, I don't have time for this. I don't even know what's going on. I don't know who you are. I just want to fight. And the guy's trying to monologue, but our main character, Rusty, just does not care. So we kick his butt, and we take a plane, and we leave just in time because Lieutenant Kawashima is right on our tail, and she asks them to shoot us down. So the Japanese soldiers in the area shoot our plane, and we crash land into the next village. Sadly, this village is under siege by a ghost girl, Lily, at night, who curses people, and the next sunset, they die. And there's really no way to stop it, apparently. This old woman named Sea Mama, which I really don't want to call her that, but that's what we're going to call her. Sea Mama is trying to help people, but she doesn't know what to do or how to go about it. So she just does her best, and they still die. The very first night we're here, Lily curses Alice to death. So now she's gonna die unless we do something. What can we do? The Sea Mother then begins to tell us the story of Lily and how she became this way, and it is a very interesting attempt at trying to tell us a scary story. The problem is that it just isn't scary, and this poor woman doing the voiceover for the old lady does a decent job trying to keep it all together, but it just, the writing is weird, and the fact that they're having her speak as this old woman is weird, and so what happens in the story is that Lily's father's a fisherman. He goes out, there's a storm, he doesn't come back home, and she says, I'll do anything to have my father come back, and lightning strikes, and his ship comes back, and he's fine. However, because of this, she sacrifices her voice for his life. But it's not the way you think. She now has his voice, and he now has her voice, which at first you'd think, well, he lived. What's wrong with that? Apparently, both of them are just beside themselves having different voices. So neither of them speaks again. But also neither of them knows how to write notes, because neither of them communicates with anyone through writing. They just don't know how to write. They must be illiterate or something. I don't know. But she falls in love with someone, and she can't speak, and so she decides, well, the only way to get my voice back is for me to kill my own father. Again, no notes, but apparently this is what she needs to do. So she stands at his bed every night, thinking about killing him, but she doesn't. And then eventually he goes back out to fish, because that worked so well last time, and he dies again, and she doesn't get her voice back because I guess she doesn't kill him. So she has his voice, and she screams and is upset. Of course, her dad died again, and this this time she can't even save him. It's such a weird situation. And the person she fell in love with comes to like try and console her, but she won't let him in. And then suddenly some weird thing comes out of the harbor, probably her dad's like dead body, and he's like schlooping across the town trying to get to her house. And then the story ends before you see whatever happens with this schlooping piece of meat. But this woman does onomatopoeia with the schloop and the splat and stuff, and it's just like, I applaud the attempt. The problem is the execution made me laugh so hard. It was just so hard to accept and suspend disbelief during the storytelling. I understand what they were going for, and again, like I said, I think it's a really good attempt, but it was just too funny. She said schloop and splat way too many times and made little crying noises in the fisherman's voice, but it's Lily. I don't know, man.
Schloop, splat. And then the gulls started to screech too, perhaps because they wanted that meat.
Are they really gonna This is... I really like that they went for this, but this is the only time in the game they do something like this. And what was best about this is the imagery behind the story. On the screen, you'll see all the imagery behind what she's saying, and it really adds to the story. I just wish it happened more often. I wish they tried this approach more often. I wish the whole game was like this. The problem is that the game is too quirky and silly and aware that it's trying to be horror, but also silly, and it just doesn't work after this. So I wish they had gone this direction more, like really heavily went into it, because this could have worked really well. Anyway, the story is interrupted by the entrance of Zhu Zhen, who's here to actually help with the curse, and he was delayed because the trains got blown up by Margaret, and this whole thing would have been over already. However, he sees it's Alice, recognizes us, and we all work together to try and figure this thing out. And before we leave, we get to see a scene with Lieutenant Kawashima once again. She is confirming that all of us are in this new place called Dalian, and that there's a curse and there's monsters. However, we're fighting them. She knows that we're being nice about it. She hasn't decided what she's going to do yet, but she seems very interested. So she sends out for herself and this other dude, Sergeant Kato, to go on a boat and come to Dalian to check things out. She thinks that she needs to just keep an eye on stuff since we are helping. We'll see what happens later. Now that we're back together with Zhu Zhen, Margaret and I decide to go fight a little bit, get some experience, and then we go to the side of the village where we entered, and there's already a summoning circle on the ground that's making all of the monsters appear here in the village. It was very, very quick. In fact, we could have just gone right over there. I leveled up a little bit first, and when I come over here, we fight a boss. Now, let me just talk about the boss and character design in this game. They are very, very good. They're creepy, they're well designed, it's like an amalgamation of things, and I think they did a good job. It's kind of like a body horror. It's got these wings, it's got this big tongue coming out of its mouth, its face is covered in a veil. It's just a great design, and a lot of the enemies in this game have great design. Anytime I show some of the enemies, just take a quick look at them, make sure you get a good one, because there's so many good ones. I wish, again, that they had taken a little bit more of a harder horror approach, because it would have worked way better than this quirky approach with horror mixed in. It just never caught on for me. So the character and enemy design are great, but the story itself just isn't scary enough for this to work. The boss goes down very quickly, and Zhu Zhen says, "So, do you remember in the last village we were in, the Black Tortoise? Well, the people here worship the Blue Dragon, which is what Lily prayed to save her father. And that's not actually what happened. The lightning strike didn't necessarily help her. It actually sealed away the Blue Dragon. Just like the Black Tortoise was removed from that other village, the Blue Dragon was removed from this village, and it was protecting them. That's why she turned into a monster, not this other crazy long story the old woman said. It's a lot simpler. Someone took the idol, and now their village is screwed." Zhu Zhen goes on to tell us that there are 4 total idols, and these idols have been protecting everyone from a valorization, this demon's invocation, which was talked about earlier when Dwight talked to Roger Bacon. Apparently, 15 years ago, Dwight tried this invocation to destroy the world with a demon, and it didn't work. Luckily, someone stepped in and stopped him. But this means that it's going to happen again. 15 years later, Dwight's back at it trying to destroy the world again. Now, Alice's father was trying to protect her. About a month ago, he was trying to find someone to protect her from being the key, or something that might be what activates this demon invocation. So that's why Dwight and Roger are both after her. Her father was killed by Roger Bacon, and now she's fleeing. Her father was trying to send her as far away as possible so no one could get to her. However, it's pretty obvious that she's got something going on. I mean, she glows and floats in the air and has weird eyes. So everyone knows where she is. So the whole point of this is they want to do this demon invocation. She is the key and they're trying to get to her. Now we've got to figure out a way to stop it and keep her safe. Just as we finish learning this, Lieutenant Kawashima shows up and says, "Hey, I overheard everything. Would you like a ride on my boat? I'm a smuggler." Obviously, she's trying to keep her identity a secret. Although Margaret seems to know who she is. She doesn't like her, and she's actually out to get her anyway. We accept her offer and get on the boat. It turns out Rusty is seasick, and we walk around the boat talking to everyone, hearing what they had to say. We do listen in on Lieutenant Kawashima and Kato as they speak about the murders on the train and how we're the murderers, but Kato isn't convinced that we are. And Kawashima seems to also be slightly confused. We're doing good things, but we supposedly murdered people? Well, she's still gonna keep an eye on us. Eventually, the boat just suddenly comes to a halt in the middle of the water, and Lily's ghost has stuck us right there, and she's gonna try and kill us. However, unbeknownst to us, the Sea Mother is on the ship with us and tries to exorcise her, which it doesn't work because Lily just kind of notices. So in the end, the Sea Mother and Zuzhen decide to put talismans and markings all over the ship to help capture Lily. While this is going on, a few monsters attack us, and we actually save Lieutenant Kawashima, or the smuggler. I think this is starting to change her mind. And then the Sea Mother is attacked. We begin putting the symbols down quicker so that we can get this thing done. She finally confronts us, and we kick her butt in about 2 minutes. But then Dawai shows up and says, "It's been me controlling her." Well, I mean, freaking duh, you're the one stealing all the idols. So he empowers her to be even stronger, and we fight her more. And she's this weird purple squid octopus type thing. And Sea Mama uses all her magic to help us, and she dies in the process. But we do stop Lily's spirit thing, and Dawai has to leave. Sea Mother dies, sadly, and we continue on with our quest in hopes that we can find where Dawai is to stop him from this demon invocation. We do see another cutscene with Dawai talking to another guy, Wugwai, I'm not sure exactly how to say his name, and he's asking him to help him yet again to stop Zuzhen. Apparently they know each other. This is not the first time they've seen each other. In fact, the last time he did the demon invocation, Zuzhen was there to try and stop him. This guy is also someone who is there trying to stop him. He even mentions that this is the second time a dude who can transform into demons is trying to stop them, and they're kind of confused as to why he's still alive. And he says, no, it's a different person. He's younger, but he definitely can transform. Things are getting a little suspicious here. Already fought someone who seems similar to us, and this was 15 years ago. Didn't her dad die 15 years ago? Oddly enough, we see a cutscene explaining the first time Zuzhen met Wugwai when he was trying to stop Dawai from doing the demon invocation 15 years ago. And he was actually saved by Colonel Hyuga and Zen, two people who live in this very town. But Hyuga is our dad, and it's confirmed here as Alice asks, hey, this guy can transform just like Rusty. Do you think he's Rusty's? And Zuzhen's like, yup, I just haven't told him yet. Which is really nice of him to not tell me he knew my dad, but whatever. We take control of Zuzhen and we get to explore the city a little bit, talking to everyone around here, figuring out some new things about the place we're in, until we eventually find the shop of the other man in the cutscene who helped us, besides Rusty's dad. He has a shop here and we wanted to go talk to him since, of course, he's an old friend of ours. The second we enter the shop, we get a cutscene with Lieutenant Kawashima, who learns that she is under investigation and is being spied on because everyone is, just in case they're a spy or doing something wrong in the Japanese army, I guess. So she's like, okay, I gotta be careful. But this new guy, who is sometimes her friend, is talking to her about the people she's been watching, us. And she says to wait on this because she's not sure what she wants to do yet. I think she is having second thoughts on who we are and what we stand for, which, by the way, is good. This new guy tells her that Dawai is after the white tiger so that he can cast his Taoist magic. Not the invocation, but it's called Taoist magic now to them at least. So they say, okay, we need to get the white tiger statue, like the black tortoise and the blue dragon. However, it's impossible to get to. Everyone who's gone there has died. Even Dawai can't get there and get the white tiger statue out of this area so that he can be free to cast his magic. So then she gets an idea and says, maybe we send our new friends to the white tiger statue and get them to get it. Obviously, she's gonna use us. Back inside the shop with Zuzhen, we find out that the old guy who used to own this does not own it anymore. His daughter, however, is playing a shamisen on stage for everyone to listen to. And when she's done, we try and talk to her, finding out that Wu Guai, the other bad guy, is actually the new owner of this shop. And I don't know why, but apparently that's the whole thing going on. So he fights us, and we have to fight solo with Zuzhen until we get to this guy, and we find out that Wu Guai is impervious to any kind of magic, and he has to be physically attacked, and Zuzhen is not strong enough to fight him. So he uses a special ability called Game of Death and kills us immediately. But Rusty appears from nowhere and just pummels this guy into the ground. I mean, that's my favorite thing about Rusty, is that he pummels people into the ground. After this, Zhu Zhen, his old friend, and his daughter come to us to the hotel room and talk to us about all the things that have happened in the past 15 years. It's revealed to Rusty that his dad really was the person with Zhu Zhen and stopped the demon invocation 15 years ago. However, Zhu Zhen says that he killed him, most likely because his dad sacrificed himself in one way or another. We're not exactly sure quite yet, but he does tell us that his dad did save the world, so that's something to be proud of. Woo, Dad, thank you. A lot of feelings and emotions are let loose here, and until eventually his old friend says, wait a minute, if Dawai is doing this thing again, isn't he gonna go after the white tiger statue? Something that we learned about not long ago from Kawashima when she was talking to her men. Zhu Zhen says, oh yes, of course. So now we must make our way to the white tiger statue. Now Kawashima does come in and announce to us she knows where that is and how to get there, and it's kind of weird for us since we still think she's just a smuggler boss, but Margaret is very certain that she does not like her, she is someone else. After hitting the shops in the lottery in town, I make my way over to the new area we must go to. Zhu Zhen already knows Master Zifa, who is the one in possession of the white tiger statue. They live under a network of caves that has tons of very strong monsters, and this is the reason Dawai did not want to come here. The strong monsters and the fact that Master Zifa is pretty powerful. As well as this cat-like kid, I don't really know who he is, but he does introduce us to how the dungeons ahead of us will work. Now, this area has 3 dungeons we must complete, and each one comes with a set of restrictions. The party is broken up into 2 different parties of 2 people, Zhu Zhen and Rusty, and then Margaret and Alice. The 2 men must beat all of the monsters in this area, including a boss, while not having access to any items in battle. That means they can still punch and use magic, which is just fine. Actually, it's pretty easy. Zhu Zhen has a healing spell already, and Rusty is just good at punching. As I make my way along the caves, it's very similar copy-paste areas, but they are connected in different ways. Each copy-pasted area is actually in a different section of the dungeon. You just gotta kind of remember where you've been and if this is the right way, and you don't really know. Sometimes you hit a dead end that has some items, sometimes you hit a dead end and there's just nothing, but other times you find the correct way to go until you find the boss, and then you know you've gone the right way. There are a lot of little areas in these dungeons, but they all end up being about the same. Go through until you find the boss, with the restrictions active. The 2 men have a very easy time this first go around, but then the women, Alice and Margaret, have a pretty difficult time as they are only allowed to use items and attacks. They cannot use magic, and I'm going to tell you what, magic is their forte, because Margaret can hit the whole entire enemy team, and Alice can heal as well as do some holy damage, but neither of them can. And Alice is really weak, honestly. This is the part of the game that makes you feel bad for not upgrading either of their 2 weapons, even though you feel like you don't have to. It's really helpful to. Now, upgrading weapons does increase their magic damage, so it is kind of obvious that you should be, but if you haven't yet, let's say you just haven't upgraded their weapons because their magic has been fine, well, you'll find out here that you really need their attacks to be more powerful to kill stuff. Now, the enemies are weaker in comparison due to the fact they know that Alice can only hit a maximum damage of like 10, but eventually I make it through that one as well. Then we go back to the 2 guys, and they are now not allowed to use anything but regular attacks. And again, I find this a little weird because, well, Rusty's really good at punching, so of course we're gonna be just fine. He can't use his fusion monster transformations, which is interesting, but just his normal punches are strong anyway. I've built him in such a way that he has very strong attacks, and there's really no issue here. It does take a while though, because going to the dungeons and fighting random battles over and over is just time wasting. But in the end, we finally make it to Master Zifa. He talks to us for a moment until the little cat kid decides to go get the white tiger votive picture that apparently is the actual thing that the white tiger statue is, and as he does so, Dawai takes over his body, kills him, and takes the statue, but also knocks all of us out and takes Alice, because she's the key for the invocation, if you didn't remember. Now, Master Zifa uses the last of his energy to protect us and teleport us out of the now crumbling dungeon we're in. Everything has gone wrong, and it's really going bad for us. So as we get teleported out, Wu Guai is waiting for us, and we have to fight him in a boss battle. This boss battle isn't too difficult, not yet at least, and we beat him here, and then we escape. This whole time, Lieutenant Kawashima is waiting outside for us, still pretending to be the smuggler. She sends one of her colleagues and his small army into the dungeon to find us and any monsters, and they do. They find us, and we go all the way back to town, where we go to the inn, and we start talking about what's really going on. We find out that Lieutenant Kawashima is not a smuggler like she said, but she's a lieutenant of the Japanese army. Now she knows that we're not nearly as bad as she thought we were, and Dawai is also our enemy, so she decides, hey, maybe we should kind of join up. Our goal is to get to the tower where Dawai is keeping all of this stuff and is going to do the demon invocation, but we need a key. There's only one way in, and the key is held by Lieutenant Kawashima. She gives the key to Kato to give to us, and as we try and go through town, we actually get stopped by a lot of Japanese soldiers. Don't forget, this game takes place during World War I times, and people are on edge and there's armies everywhere, so there's going to be a lot of resistance. Before we actually move on, we see a cutscene where the other lieutenant who is helping Kawashima and us get the white tiger statue is actually killed because they find out that he was lying about having seen Kawashima. His whole thing is that he was supposed to report about her whereabouts to them immediately when he found her, but didn't, and so they know he's keeping stuff, they say he's a spy, and they kill him. And now they're coming after Kawashima. In fact, Kato comes to give us the key, and we follow him back, and they actually get attacked by the same dude who killed their friend who helped us earlier. And we actually fight them and stop them and kick them out. Kawashima is now pretty much just dedicated to helping us figure out what to do, since she knows all of this demon stuff is true. I prepare my party by buying some new weapons, getting some acupuncture, and getting some new items that'll help me through this dungeon. And I go through what seems to be like a long puzzle and mostly just fights. You see each of the votive pictures that we found for each of the 4 elements, the white tiger, the black tortoise, the blue dragon, they all are scattered around, and you must pick them up and put them in different places to progress. But that's it. Although here the enemies have got much tougher, and you can see the designs of these enemies are just getting insane. These very pasty white enemies are facing backwards, and I guarantee you these are umbilical cords that are coming out of their stomachs, but they look like little wieners, or big ones actually, and they point at you with them, and they hit you with them, and they cast magic with them, and they just back up towards you, and they're pretty creepy just in general, but they're tough as well, and there's like 6 different kinds of these guys, all with different elements. Now, I didn't talk about this a lot earlier, but I will now. Fighting in this game is a little different because you need to make sure you're matching elements, otherwise you just aren't doing the damage. It's very obvious when you don't. However, the very beginning parts of the game are much more about learning how to use the Judgment Ring in general, which means that if you are constantly hitting critical strikes and not missing your spells, you are going to be just fine. But now things have started to ramp up. Now, this is about the middle of the game, so this is a good time to talk about how combat starts to get more difficult. And like I said, it's through the weaknesses and resistances of your enemies and yourself. Because like I said, things do get more difficult. These guys aren't impossible. In fact, they give a good amount of experience, so if you take your time and blast through them, eventually you'll get to a point where you can save here and get some extra experience. There were a couple times where I went back to the graveyard, where I picked up the first level of the rest of the elements for Rusty to transform into. Obviously, I want to have enough coverage to fight anybody and at least do some extra damage. Before I talk about the boss of this section, once you get up to Dewey and Alice to save her, you fight a badger that he summons, which is very easy. I snipe it to death. Then I fight Dewey himself, but he doesn't do any extra damage. In fact, this fight is very simple. We do end up saving Alice. Now, at the beginning of the game, we learn that we sometimes hear voices in our head, and they ask us to save Alice. I mentioned it once, but it only comes up every so often, and there's just nothing to grasp at other than a voice telling us what to do, and most of it's just make sure Alice is okay. And now, everyone in the room hears this voice, and it gives Alice strength to stand back up and help us fight Dewey before he's able to summon a god to destroy the world. So this voice has a lot more power than we originally thought. Before we fight the final version of Dewey, we do get Kato and Kawashima to come in and give us a save point, a place to buy stuff, and now we can challenge the final boss of this area, which does feel a little bit like a final boss, but it's not. It's the halfway boss. And this is the perfect halfway boss. He is a little difficult. He's got a lot of health. He's got a lot of strong attacks. The biggest one being a petrification attack. If he hits you and petrifies you, all 3 of your characters get petrified, they are done. You lose the battle. You must have a way to heal it, but honestly, the best way to heal it is to just equip accessories. Now, before this, I really only equipped accessories that gave me some extra damage. Maybe it gave me some extra health or extra defense, maybe a little extra speed, but it's becoming apparent that you need 1 slot for some kind of resistance, and we can just put a petrification resistance accessory on each individual character, and they will never be petrified, which does make the boss fight a lot easier. It's still hard. It still takes me about 20 minutes of fighting to kill him, but now I can't just instantly lose. And this is how battles for bosses are going to work from now on. And we really need to make sure we have the right stuff equipped, because accessories are going to start getting more advanced and giving you a lot more option than we ever thought possible. I beat Dewey at his own game, and he crawls sheepishly to the middle of this platform where we just kind of let him finish summoning the demon. And it kills him, of course, and there's a big, huge demon god thing in the middle of this platform. Roger Bacon shows his ugly little face again and starts talking to us about how, well, this is probably the end of the world unless there's something we can do right now, and actually actually there is. One quick thought from Rusty Shackleford has him standing up and running towards the demon. He decides that he's going to fuse with it, just like he's fused with other countless demons, so that he can use their powers. However, this is a god. It's very, very powerful, and everyone knows, including Zhu Zhen, who screams for him to stop, not to go through with this. And Roger even confirms right here that this is the way that my dad died and saved the world. Apparently, we have successfully fused with the demon, and it does start blowing some stuff up, but then in the end, it flies away, and that's the last we hear of it. In fact, Alice says that's the last time I ever saw him, which is completely untrue. There's more game left. I don't know why she says this, and in hindsight, I'm still confused. Regardless of this, everyone's a little bit confused on what to do next, and they all go on a hiatus from fighting demons. And it's 6 months later now. Zhu Zhen and Alice have teamed up to go do some little odd jobs here and there where they help take care of demons and monsters and spirits and ghosts. They've practically become the Ghostbusters. During our time of exorcism by appointment here, Alice's sixth sense keeps telling her that Rusty is alive somewhere. She doesn't know how to get to him or where he could be, but she's pretty convinced that he is alive, and Zhu Zhen also agrees. He's gotta be alive. We'll find him eventually. While doing this and talking to each other in this little tavern, someone comes up and says, "Hey, can you guys please help? The town over. My wife and child are in danger. I'm hurt. We need help." And so we decide, you know what? Let's go help. But before we do, someone mentions how Margaret's going to be back from her little trip soon. Maybe we should wait for her. So the guy who came to the tavern asking us for help leaves, and we decide, you know, maybe we should go grab him and tell him about Margaret before we leave. As we go to get him, he is attacked by an old woman, an evil spirit. And Alice says she's never felt such evil here in Europe, which means that we are now in Europe rather than Japan. We fight two monsters, apparently she's two monsters, but we cannot save this man named Terry. And it's now that we decide we've got to save his wife and child in that whole village. We just can't wait for Margaret. Yeah, you're right. We can't wait for the third party member. You know, having a full party. I really hate it when I don't have a full party. We head out to this town in a faraway area of Europe, and we find that there's a big, heavy fog covering it. And every so often it will turn red and monsters will attack. We go find this guy's wife and child, and they talk to us about the state of affairs of this place, and it's not looking good. And in fact, the mayor kind of seems weird. They say he's a weirdo, and it's like, oh yeah, no, he's totally the one behind this. In fact, most of what we learn here is just that. He comes in and talks to them, and it acts very weird. We're pretty sure it's him, but they do also mention a manor in the back that hasn't been occupied for over 300 years. It's just been sitting there destitute, and no one will go near it, except for the little girl. Apparently, she went in there and talked to someone. She said there's someone in there, and they're nice. She talks to them all the time, and they're friends, and her mom's like, whoa, don't talk about that. And she's like, but why? He was nice to me. So we're like, oh, this is intriguing. Now, the mayor also wants to get this item this little girl has. See, her dad was friends with someone in America who has sent them something special that will help them. Right now, the mayor believes it's something like gold, and it's very helpful for whatever he's doing, but he won't tell us, of course, what he's doing. He just wants the item. So on top of all this, the mayor's weird. He's trying to get this item the girl has. Her dad died. She's going to this manor. There's monsters attacking. We really got to figure things out. So we head to the manor to confront this man who might or might not be part of this monster infestation in this poor little village. Traversing the castle isn't too difficult. There's a little puzzle with gravestones, and when you click on them, you light a fire. In the end, they just have names attached to them, and you gotta click them in alphabetical order. It doesn't really make it clear that's what you gotta do, but I find it out eventually. I finally make it to the master of this castle, and he turns out to be a bored vampire who's been sitting around for 300 years because he was bored. He left everyone to just do what they're doing because apparently, I don't know, he was just bored. That's it. That's all I know. But his name is, prepare yourselves, Keith Valentine. First of all, Keith, what kind of crappy name is that? Second of all, Valentine? Who is this? Vincent? Anyway, he's a pretty powerful character, both in magic and attacks, and I really like him in my party for pretty much the rest of the game. Anyway, he comes with us and he goes to visit the little girl again, whose mother was taken from her by the mayor. Turns out that he actually was the reason why the monsters are coming out. No duh. He was trying to look into the life of vampires and find out whether or not there was a vampire in the castle that we were just in. And yeah, Keith is not a very happy vampire now that he found out that he's making monsters to put in the town he was supposed to be protecting. Although, Keith, you probably should have been awake to help people, man. It seems like you're nice, so I don't know. Anyway, we get pissed and we go try to save this girl's mom, and this guy's like, whoa, who are you? He's like, I'm a vampire. And the guy's like, no, you're not. I've been researching vampires for years. I haven't found anything. Keith's like, well, I'm gonna kill you then. So that's what we do. We fight this dude. Well, if we're coming off of that middle game boss and having it be super difficult, this guy is a pushover. We beat him in about 2 or 3 minutes of just constant attacks, and we saved this little girl's mom. Keith tells us, well, you know, if people are like this all over the place, I might as well come with you. I'm bored. Yes, we know you're bored, Keith. And then kind of offhandedly, he says, we should also investigate the demon sitting in the top tower of my manor, just to make sure that it's okay. It went in there and locked itself in and hasn't come out, just kind of left it alone. What the crap? There's a big strong demon who's just taken residence in the top tower of your manor, and you're just now telling us? That sounds like a familiar person. Let's go check this out. And we do. We go to the top of that tower, and on the way up, it's a very long staircase. It's got a lot of strong monsters, and Keith was scared to go up there by himself, or just wasn't interested, not sure which. But we take on all those monsters, and when we get to the top of the tower, we see none other than Rusty Shackleford sitting against the wall of the tower. He's practically just a brainless monster at this point, so we beat the shit out of him. He's really not too hard. He does transform into one of the demons he gets, but we destroy him, and afterwards, Alice goes unconscious and goes inside of the graveyard in his mind that we usually go to when we want to fight new monsters. She walks over and talks to those masks, the ones who explained the malice mechanic to us, and they say, well, what are you doing here? And she's like, well, I want to save him. And they say, well, you can, but you must take over for him. And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's worth it. So we do. We take over for him. It's not exactly clear right away, but she is now taking on this big burden he's taken on himself. So since she's taking it, she is now doomed, literally doomed at this point, at least. And she goes to go talk to him in a special area where we've seen his dreams before. He's seen his dad tilling some ground near this tree, and generally this is where we fought my dad in that mask that he wears. It's, really just an interpretation of ourselves, holding ourselves back and being scared of everything. So Rusty gets to fight him after Alice kind of kicks his ass out of whatever bunk he's set himself up in. So we fight him, and his dad is not too hard except for one move he has. It's this 3 exclamation point move where he reduces your health down to 1. As long as you heal, you're fine. But if he gets an extra turn after that, you're gonna die. So you need to make sure you heal afterwards. Otherwise, it's a pretty simple fight. You want to transform into a strong monster and just whoop his ass. Now that Rusty is back to his normal self and Alice has been doomed, not that anyone knows really, everyone talks about what to do next, and Keith says that he wants to travel along with you guys since he's now awake after 200 to 300 years. But before we leave this room, just before we leave it, we see a small shiny object in it, and then we are teleported all the way down to the bottom, which means that if you want to get the shiny object, you've got to go all the way back up the castle and the tower, which takes a minute, but it's totally worth it. You see, around the world there are hidden these gravestones, and they are dependent on the element for each of the monsters that you have in the graveyard. So this one is the Dark Gravestone. As you get more experience towards each element of monster, you'll acquire both level 1 and level 2 monsters for that element, and level 3 is very difficult to get. The only way to do it is to find the gravestone that is associated with that element. So this one will be the Dark Monster at level 3. The only way you can challenge him once you get enough experience is to have the gravestone in your inventory and then go challenge him like normal. Otherwise, you will not be able to challenge him. So you gotta watch out for these all over the world. We head back to the tavern that has somehow become the base of operation for Alice and Zhu Zhen's Exorcist by Appointment foray. And while we're there, there's a woman who just kind of is drunk in the background, and she says she's going to the bathroom, and Alice decides to go follow her in, but that woman is actually possessed by the one who killed Terry, the guy who came earlier to ask for help for the village that we just finished. So she's there to try and kill Alice, but we kick her ass. So she tricks us, and we fight her with holy magic, and since it does so much damage, she just can't stand up to it. And she tells us that her name is Arcane Olga, and that she is in cahoots with Roger Bacon, which means now Roger Bacon is back into things. They've been wondering where he is because he's been quiet for 6 months. I mean, it's been 6 months since Rusty's been gone and, took over that monster. I think Roger's probably pretty interested in what's going on right now, especially since he was so invested in it earlier. Anyway, Margaret is actually in Paris, somewhere she thinks Roger Bacon might be. Not only that, it's the exact place that Roger Bacon killed Alice's father only a little while ago, before all of this started. Once we get to the city, Rusty has bad dreams about the fact that Alice is now having the burden of doom, and she's probably going to die from all this just to save his life. Alice finds herself standing in the spot where her father died not too long ago at the hands of Roger Bacon. Oddly enough, just as they're about to leave, Roger Bacon shows his goddamn face, and Arcane Olga, and they attack. But Margaret steps in to help us. Finally, she's back from out of nowhere. So we all fight Arcane Olga, and then Roger Bacon leaves. Margaret's happy to see Rusty, everyone goes back to the inn, and we talk a little bit about what's next. We decide that it's probably best to go to the Vatican, because that's probably where some cool stuff is happening. But before we do, we go back to the church that Alice's father died outside of. This is when we start to get a little bit more context on who everyone is. Roger Bacon, in the year 1500, was studying magic, and he's actually been alive for a long time at this point. And during the witch trials, he was accused of being a witch, mostly because of his research. But I mean, his long life is probably meaning something, right? And then he's exiled. That's the last time anyone's really ever heard of him. And at that point, he was actually a nice person. He was trying to research things in the form of medicine and science, and was trying to help the world. world. But once he was exiled, I think he lost it a little. So overall this time he's become evil, and also during this time he stole 2 books from the Vatican, 2 very important books that could allow him to do some kind of demon invocation, which is what's been happening. Alice's father and another of his exorcist friends were tasked with finding the 2 books that were stolen, and they spent years looking for them, never being able to find them. Alice is born, they still keep looking. Eventually, Alice's father's friend says he thinks he found a book, and that's the last anyone has ever heard of him. Most likely he died to Roger Bacon, who was trying to keep books for himself. And then we come here to this church. Now this is before we know he's actually dead. We get a letter that says that he's going to meet him at this church and to come here so we can talk about this book that he might have found. But it's not him, it's actually Roger Bacon. Roger doesn't want Alice's father coming to try and take books away from him either, and he also has learned a little bit more about Alice and the fact that she has some kind of magic power and she might be a key to these invocations. We know this because we've already seen this section. Dwight stole her to use her as the key for the invocation, and it worked. So Roger was onto something then. But it failed. Her father protected her, she got away, and now she's with us, so it's much harder for him to enact whatever he's doing. We head on over to London to check out what's going on over there, and before we can actually do anything, we get robbed by some orphans who are just living out of this broken down house's basement that leads to another house next door that no one can get into because they've barricaded. There we get our wallet back once we find the place, and we meet this kid named Holly, who agrees to help us find the person we're looking for to make up for stealing our wallets. Holly actually takes us over to the orphanage, the place that all the kids said is terrible, and they would rather live in that broken down house than try and live in the orphanage. When we get there, we knock on the door, we go in and talk to a man named Jack and ask if this is the house of Cardinal Simon, the person we're looking for. He says, yeah, 2 years ago, but I bought this place to turn it into an orphanage. Margaret gets the good idea to actually ask, hey, I'm a reporter. I want to ask you about the kids living here. Mostly because it's kind of terrible that the kids are scared to live at the orphanage. Of course, the guy shoos us off very quickly, and we learn absolutely nothing about what's going on at the orphanage. We ask around town about the orphanage, and all that anyone ever knows is that children who have gone to the orphanage have gone missing completely. They're never seen again, and this is why they were asking about the kids in the orphanage. There's no one running around in there, so it's like, where the fuck are the kids? Eventually, we go back to the hideout of the kids who rather not be in the orphanage, and Holly realizes that most of the kids are gone. They've been taken by the orphanage, probably. They found this hideout, and then he shows his true power, which is just kind of like making the screen shake a little bit. We don't actually know what he does, but he does have some kind of psychic or mental type power, and he doesn't know how to use it yet. So just as a quick recap, we have an old man who does magic with a staff. We have a woman who calls in technology. We have a woman who knows holy magic. We have a guy who can transform into demon. We have a vampire, and now we have a kid with psych powers. Everyone has like vastly different powers, and I actually kind of like that. Although in essence, in battle, they're about the same. They just do elemental damage, or they heal you, or they cure statuses, or they do status damage to the enemy. It's not really like that much of a different mechanic. It's mostly about the judgment ring. Okay, so we're all pissed, and we go to the orphanage, break in, and start fighting everyone we can find until we can find the kids, and we actually do. In one of the first rooms we looked in, we find 2 of the young kids, and we let them go. We get them out of there. The kids also tell us that the older kid, Chris, is still in the building, and they don't know what's going on, but Jack took him away. So we have to go figure out what's going on. And as we do, there are a couple rooms, and in each of these rooms we read some diaries, we look at pictures. They give us some dates that we put into these passcode dials on the doors. It's very simple. Rusty will say, what month is March again? What month is July again? And that's your code to like look at the numbers and put them together in a set of 4. The day, the month, and the year. Just the last 2 numbers of the year. It's pretty simple. We do learn something from those diaries though. And the first one we read is from a kid who is treated special by Jack for some odd reason. Mostly just to vent about all his issues. We don't really know what they are, but the kid notices that he comes to him to vent all the time, and if he listens, he gets food, which is really terrible. Like a terrible thing to do. And then one day he gets a big meal. He's like, I got a big meal because I listened to Jack, and he said he was so excited I get to help him with his experiments. And that's the last entry in the diary. Most likely this kid is dead. So we take the code we got from this room and go to the next one, and we read a little bit about Jack himself. He used to be a doctor, and he moved here with his mom, hoping to just have a new life here. But his mom gets sick and dies. Obviously he's extremely distraught, but for some reason he's convinced a curse killed her, mostly because he's questioning God and all that stuff. But of course, who other than Roger Bacon appears and gives this guy some dark and evil text that he should read to see if he can resurrect his own mother from the dead. It's probably not going very well because it looks like he's trying to steal a lot of kids for whatever he's doing. We finally meet up with Jack, and he's just gonna go through with it and throw Chris in a pot so that he can resurrect his mom, but I don't think it's gonna work, man. It doesn't seem to have worked yet. So we decide to fight him. And before we do, Holly activates his power to save Chris, and the mysterious voice that has talked to me, Alice, and eventually everyone else is now talking again. And she tells Holly to just control his power because it's gonna be too much and he's gonna kill everyone. Gotta be careful. And this mysterious voice is getting mysterious Mysteriouser. This boss fight isn't too bad, just like the other boss fights I've had. Honestly, the fact that Rusty is so strong physically, and I constantly have him transforming into the second level fire demon that he has learned from the gravestones. This one comes with a large amount of physical damage, but also the ability to increase his own physical damage up to 36% for like 5 turns. That's a lot of damage, and if you hit perfects, if you hit critical strikes on the judgment ring for every attack, you start to chunk boss's health so quickly that you pretty much just focus on getting him healed up and his attack up, and everyone else just keeps him alive. We beat Jack down and save Chris's life, and we take him back to their little hideout, and Holly talks to us about his mom. You see, that mysterious voice we've been hearing this whole entire game is actually Holly's mom, and he's absolutely certain that it's her, because her voice sounds the same as when he knew her when he was younger. But they've taken her away because they said she's a witch. She's got powers. I mean, Holly does too, so I guess that makes sense. But they take her away and put her in a mental hospital that Holly cannot break into because they got that thing on lockdown. But it's also kind of strange. Why is it so hard to get into if it's just a mental hospital? So he asks us for help, and we say, well, since we never learned where Cardinal Simon was, I guess we'll go help you get your mom back. We head over to this mental hospital, and we get to see a cutscene where, again, Roger Bacon rears his ugly head. He's talking to the guy who actually owns the place and is running it, keeping Holly's mom there against her will. Now, this dungeon is really simple. There are 2 things you do. You get some special coins that you drop into fountains and hit buttons, and then you get keys associated with the suits on cards, like, you know, club, diamond, hearts, and you get them and you just go into each different room until you finally find what you need to get into the last door. This area has some really interesting monster design, like this creepy hand coming out of these dogs' mouths and then holding it up. Like, obviously it could be standing up on its 4 legs, but no, instead the hand does the walking for the monster dog, and then this person upside down naked with what appears to be like, I don't know, a brain on a stick on their feet. I don't know, man. These monster designs are just getting crazy. But we finally end up getting to the door, and the guy who owns the castle fights us. And just so you know, he's a regular dude, and when we fight him, he looks like a pregnant demon woman or something. I don't know. These monster designs are fantastic. They also don't really make much sense when you fight the person. Suddenly they're just this crazy looking demon that has nothing to do with what they looked like before, so I can't imagine how they transform into them, but whatever. This fight really isn't too bad because, like I said before, Rusty's just blasting people in the face, and Zhu Zhen has been learning new spells every so many levels, so his most recent spell does like 400 or 500 damage, which is really strong at this point. So I just keep everyone healed up, and it's pretty simple. We aren't actually able to open the door yet. Instead, Holly crawls through this little vent in the floor to find that his mom is in a straitjacket in the other room, and then he loses sight of everything and forgets to unlock the door for us. So me and Zhu Zhen have to go by ourselves and find the key, come back and get in the door, when things have already taken a turn for the worse. Roger Bacon's there, fucking us up, and he explains that he's practically doing the same thing Dewey was doing with another incantation of some sort. However, he says it's way different and it's much more, complex than you imagine, which I really don't think that's the case. I think you're just summoning a god here to destroy everyone. I mean, come on, man. Well, Roger starts to hurt Holly during all of this, and his mom gets super pissed that he's doing this, so she gets up and uses her superpowers, which I wish she would have used much earlier, not to just talk to us, but to actually help us, but whatever, fine, she's doing it now. And then Roger Bacon calls her by her name, Kudelka, which, if you don't know, is a PlayStation 1 game. That's right, this game is a direct sequel from the game Kudelka on PlayStation 1. Not only that, but the main character's name is Kudelka, and she is Holly's mom, so that's kind of cool. Like, she actually continued the next game. Too bad she agrees to go with Roger in exchange to spare her son's life, which he still has Arcane Ogla fight us for like the 50th time. And she just really isn't that hard. I beat her the first time I fight her every single time, especially because I'm transforming into that fire demon and she uses fire magic on us a lot, so it doesn't do anything to me, and then I punch her in the face. After this, we reconvene where Holly and the kids took refuge from the orphanage. Holly has a couple moments, obviously his mom was taken right in front of him, and then Rusty agrees to take him along with us. But not before Alice decides to go back to where her dad died and just check things out a little bit. We go to the exact location where Dad died, go inside the church where Father Doyle died, the guy who was helping us just a little bit ago, and we go back into the confessionals, and we find that there is a secret journal detailing how Doyle knew that Roger Bacon is not actually Roger Bacon. He is Cardinal Simon, the guy we've been looking for. Everything is really messed up now, and so Roger Bacon has been tricking everybody so that he can get revenge on the dead souls of people. I assume it's because he's been living for years, and he was branded as a witch a long time ago and kind of shoved out of society. But instead of using his awesome power to just help the world be better, he decides he's going to summon a god to destroy the world, because he doesn't believe in such a thing as peace. But whatever, instead of taking Alice and fighting us here, he actually says he's going to use Kudelka as the new key, a different key, a dark key. and we learned from Kudelka just before she left us earlier to meet a man in Wales, an old man. That was it. So we head on over there to find a very, very bizarre technological house, and Rusty even says he thinks it's gonna turn into a rocket and blast off into the sky, and he's not far from the actual truth. So we go up into this cathedral that's very, very broken down with some underground parts, and the party talks about how there's ghosts here. Bad stuff used to happen here. And suddenly an old, wiry man just walks up out of nowhere and starts talking to us. And he gives us the option to name him. His name is Strange Creature, and you can delete... never mind. He breaks the fourth wall and says, "Isn't it funny? Didn't you think you had time to name me and I'm a new friend?" This is great. I really love this. It kind of came out of nowhere, and at first I thought his character was going to be annoying, but this was really funny and unexpected, so absolutely loved it. He ends up being the real Roger Bacon, and this is why I changed the other guy's name, because now we're starting to learn that he took on this guy's moniker to seem like in his past that he was nice, but he isn't. The other Roger Bacon, the actual Cardinal Simon, is just an asshole. So now we figured out who everyone is, and we figured out that the Roger Bacon from before, Cardinal Simon, is really bent on world destruction, and this guy's gonna help us. Roger Bacon then tells us a little bit more about how Cardinal Simon was his student a long time ago, and things began to change his mind. It's practically just more of his crybaby backstory, stuff that we've already learned at this point, but it's just reiterating more specifically, I think. However, the voice actor for this guy, for Roger Bacon, who's speaking to us now, is a very popular voice actor. He has voice acted a lot of things, a lot of Pokemon characters, I believe he voiced Gary at one point, but he voiced my two favorite characters from my favorite anime, Weevil Underwood and Loomis from Yu-Gi-Oh! Ah, wonderful. This guy's awesome. So I'm glad he did this, because he just added so much to this character. After he explains all this, he says to meet him back up at the ruins when we are ready, so he's gonna help us down into the ruins to figure out where the nerves of the earth are. Apparently this place is very important, and Cardinal Simon is probably down here with Kudelka trying to summon some kind of gods to erect this large structure that just floats in the air and is the only way that we can contact the real god. This dungeon is pretty difficult. The enemies have gotten even harder, although at this point I mostly run from them. You see, I don't necessarily need the levels at this point, and in RPGs, I've talked about this before, when I get to a part where I'm near the end of the game and I can grind for my own levels, I don't want to do puzzles and run through dungeons fighting every 5 steps with random battles. So generally I avoid them here. I instead focus on the puzzles, which deal with pushing buttons of different colors to activate specific colors that will unlock treasure chests and different ways to go. This area has some really helpful items that if you take the extra time to make sure you get, you will have these really helpful things for the final boss fight. And it's something that I do because I'm already under leveled. Like I said, I'm running from everything, and I don't want to really grind. I want this challenge to continue to go. So generally I get the best items I can and use what I've got, and this is the way to do it. Just take a little extra time here. We reach Cardinal Simon and Kudelka, and he's trying to summon a god, and Kudelka tries to stop him. However, he says something about having a contract and that it's the last resort, but he's gonna do it. So Simon decides to use the same kind of magic I do to transform into demons, and transforms into this Neomito, who's supposed to help bring about this big old structure. And we kick his ass. He isn't too bad because I've built my party in a certain way, and I just have gotten used to how the game works. After this, we get a cutscene where that massive structure comes up from the bottom of the ocean and just makes this enormous light ring above the planet. And apparently, this is like a homing beacon for God, who lives 4,800,000 light years away in galaxy M72. And apparently, that's just what we call him as God, but he's really like what we would imagine God to be, I guess. I don't know. But now he's like flying in. He's about to come here to get us. So we got to do something to stop him. Before we go to the dungeon, we get a couple wrap-up scenes. One where Kudelka and Holly are talking, and Holly says, "I'll promise I'll come back, Mom. I gotta help them fight God." And she's like, "All right, honey, be home by dinner." And then we also get to see a cutscene where Lieutenant Kawashima from earlier gets killed. We also learn that Kato was in love with her, which that was a very, very minor side stuff. So it just doesn't really hit, like you'd expect to. It's like, I mean, yeah, it's sad, but we didn't know these characters very well, and we haven't heard about them in the last like 6-7 hours, so not really too interested. But it is sad because she did help us, and she was trying to save the world, but also still have armies in Japan and do stuff, so I don't know how I feel about that. And for the last time, we see Alice go inside of the graveyard where she sees her own gravestone, and the masks are asking why she isn't dead yet because they want her dead. She has to fight this dude named Atman who is trying to take her life, and he does kill us in the fight. I don't know if there's a way to win, but he says Rusty Shackleford, and then we wake up and we're like, oh crap, never mind, I'm fine, I didn't die yet. So Alice is still alive, and we go into the final dungeon, that huge structure that Cardinal Simon erected in the middle of Earth, who's summoning God. It's just crazy. Anyway, this dungeon is pretty intense. I do a lot of fighting in this dungeon since it's the last one. There are several puzzles, some of them with electric lights that will block party members and you have to take certain party members to go find a way out. There are a lot of teleporting areas where you get warped from space-time to a different area, and you just gotta try to approach each of those things in a different direction. As you walk into them, you will get teleported, and whichever way you're facing, you'll walk out of it. That means you need to approach them from the correct direction to walk out of it in the right way to find new areas of this dungeon. And it's kind of hard because it's a little disorienting finding yourself randomly placed somewhere, and it's like, okay, which one do I need to go into in which direction to actually get to where I need to go? And it takes me quite a while to figure it out. It's just too disorienting. If it was like straightforward or a little more linear, maybe it would have been easier, but just teleporting me randomly feels weird. So while I'm doing all that, I fight several different bosses before I fight the final bosses. One of them gives me a lot of trouble. He's strong, he gets multiple turns, and he can sometimes just cause my characters to die. First, I equip accessories on my characters so they cannot have the status ailment Death Hunt. That means they can at least survive through that status ailment. But he's still too strong. At this point, I have yet to get a party-wide heal, so I decide to take out Zuzen, who is usually in my party, and place in Alice, which is way more helpful. But first, I have to level up because she still doesn't have that party-wide heal. To get it and increase all of my other party members' stats, I decide it's time to just do some grinding. And I do. I spend about an hour and a half getting my characters up to a more appropriate level for this part of the game. Alice learns the party-wide heal, Rusty gets even more health and more strength, and my other party member Keith learns even more spells to heal himself but also deal damage, which is a big thing for me. If I'm able to heal him off of his own spell while also dealing damage, this gives me a leg up in the battles. At this point, battles have become try my best to only use as little of my resources as I can while making sure I'm still dealing damage, because a lot of my resources get taken away quickly. Spells cost a lot at this point, your SP goes down quickly, bosses deal tons of damage quickly. It's very hard to fight them, and it feels more puzzly. Now, just to be clear, this is the last dungeon. I could have gone back and done some side content to get best weapons, the best armor, more items, and even more levels, but I didn't. This actually is my favorite way to play RPGs. As cool as it is to get those things, I want my battles to be puzzles. I want to be able to just barely scrape by doing the right thing to make sure I've done enough damage and live. After I beat another boss who really is a pushover at this point, I'm getting real dialed in on what everyone does, and my levels have increased dramatically, so I'm much stronger. Although they still aren't in line with what people are usually at this, as I've been told several times, you're under-leveled, man. Anyway, I make it to Cardinal Simon just before God gets here, and he turns into his strongest form yet, the last form he'll ever take, because I whoop his ass. Now, the first time I fight him, I think he is the final boss, for some reason, I don't know why. So I use all my best items on him, and then the next fight is God, and I lose. I mean, obviously. But next time I come to it, it only takes an hour to get through both boss fights, now that I know what to do. So Cardinal Simon's boss fight revolves around party-wide damage as well as SP reduction. SP has been a problem in fights because the lower it is, the closer it is to becoming Berserk, the scarier it is, because if you become Berserk, that character loses all functionality for you, the player. They'll do whatever they want. It means they can attack your party members, they can heal enemies, they can hurt themselves, so you desperately don't want anyone to go Berserk. So you have to watch SP, and that is a whole other thing to heal, which means that you have to take more time from doing damage and healing health and healing MP to heal your SP. So you have a clock that you're on, a clock that's very special, and if you can do it before you have to heal SP, that's great. However, this guy removes SP from your bar just for friggin' fun. So I have to go out and get an accessory for everyone that stops the status reduction of SP. Otherwise, it's just so hard. Now, don't forget that every time you take a turn, you're still losing SP, which means you still have to heal it, but at least now he's not able to lower it. Now, I do have to heal SP a couple times, because don't forget, Rusty uses SP to transform, and Alice has the lowest amount of SP I've ever seen anyone have the whole friggin' game. It's so annoying, man. She got like 13 at the end of the game for me. So a lot of this revolves around making sure that Rusty stays powered up and is dealing damage. He has lots of health at this point, so he can survive several attacks. Alice keeps everyone healed up, topped off for MP and SP, and Keith keeps himself healed as well as damage dealt to the boss. And this is how it goes for many rounds in this Cardinal Simon fight. It is difficult, but I'm able to eventually finish it. And then we fight God, and I've saved all my best items for him. I don't usually save all of my items. I have used some of them on some of the boss fights that are hard, but in general, some of these items are so helpful that if I did not save them, I would not have beat him at this level or with this gear. And there are two things I used, a 7th key and a 5th key. These keys allow your character to take several turns in a row, and it's not necessarily like taking a full turn. What this means is if I use that key on on a character, they get to make 7 successive attacks in their attack judgment ring. And that happens all at once. It goes around once and it will come back around and it will get faster and faster and faster and faster. And it makes it so that if you want to do 7 times the amount of damage as you normally do and you hit all of them, great. But at some point it's going so fast, can you handle it? Can you click the X button on the right spots fast enough? Well, there are some other items you can use too. One that reduces the speed of your overall judgment ring. So if you're able to use that one, then the key, you're able to make it much slower and much easier. It's still difficult. It still gets pretty fast, which is crazy to think that if you don't use that, it's so fast you can't control it. But I'm able to use the 7th and both of my 5th keys to deal damage with Rusty in insane amounts. I mean, it's really the only way I'm ever able to get as much damage as I do off on this boss without dying. There were a couple close calls. One where Rusty was the last person alive and I was just barely able to keep healing over and over and over until everyone was at full health and full MP and I was able to go back to attack. And it was really close. There was like 10 minutes of just nothing but heal, 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 heal. Hope he does something other than area-wide attacks for the whole party, which is his favorite thing. He rarely does physical attacks. If he does, it's so helpful, especially if he uses them on Rusty, who has a huge health, but most often he uses large party-wide attacks that deals random elemental damage of some sort. I have no clue what it does. Sometimes it will silence Alice because I didn't realize it would. I didn't have an accessory on her to make sure she doesn't get silenced, which is silly, I know, but I have a lot of accessories to help with things like MP and SP and magic and speed to take more turns and all these different things on all my characters. I just couldn't account for everything for every character. But eventually, I am able to do enough damage to kill God. God is dead. That's right, everyone. Later, that's right, game number 72 complete, Shadow Hearts. And at the end of the game, after the credits, we see that Alice dies. That's right, we knew Alice was going to die, and we didn't do anything to save her, so she just dies. Everyone else does just fine though. They all live on doing their own thing, including Rusty, who says he'll fight harder for the world to be a safer place during World War I, I guess. And so, yeah, we could have saved her. Apparently there's a way to get an ending where she is saved, but we didn't. All right, I have to say that this was an extremely fun RPG. I thought the dialogue and the story were okay, not too bad. Nothing to write home about. It was, just decent story. It was enough to help move the plot forward and to understand things, and some of things were interesting, they were surprising, which is great, that's fine. But the best thing about this game is the combat. Judgment Ring is just so much fun. I love being able to have some kind of action and combat to do. I don't like just hitting attack and item and defend and magic sometimes. I like to be a little different, and this game really, really gave it to us. And it's just fun to see if you can hit things in the right order and get critical hits. I mean, the items I used on the last boss to make myself have successive attacks in a row and have that thing speed up, it's so much fun. It feels so much more puzzly because you can fail your attacks and that screws you over. You can fail your healing, you can fail your resurrection, but you can also on the other end do more damage than you ever could just by being more accurate and paying attention. So it gives you the choice. Do you want to do normal damage? Do you want to do more than you could possibly do? Or do you want to do 0? If as long as you're willing to put the time in and pay attention, you can do any of those things. I mean, it doesn't really take a lot to do 0 damage. You just don't ever pay attention. But what I'm saying is it gives you the choice. If you get better at it, you can get better at the game. So that's great. I love it. I love it. So this easily gets an 8.5 for me, maybe a 9. It's close. I think there's a couple things I would change, and honestly, there's lots of things all games could change. But this one was so solid that I have to say I recommend this RPG to anyone who loves RPGs and anyone who likes horror because it's got a lot of body horror stuff. The enemy design is really great and such. So yeah, it's totally worth it. So thank you everyone for watching this video. Thank you for being here so long for this long ass video. Thank you to all the people in the stream who helped me through this game, understanding some of the mechanics of the game and cheering me on when I'm barely beating bosses by being silly and not leveling up. Thank you to the YouTube, Patreon, and Twitch memberships. I really appreciate it. You have all been picking these games and it's been a great time. So thank you. And thank you to anyone who stayed this long in the video. Like I said earlier, it's a long ass video. So I appreciate it. And I will be back with game number 73 soon. Later.